Chapter 1. Before the Gods, the Origins of Roman Religion. Before the marble temples, before Jupiter ruled from the hilltops, before the gods had faces, there was only power. The earliest Romans did not worship gods the way we think of them today. There were no thunderbolts, no golden statues, just the sense that something was always watching. The world was full of invisible forces. These were not people or personalities, but divine presences, power in the wind, in the water, in the fire. Everything had a spirit. Trees, stones, doorways, even the hinges on a gate. Every act of life, planting a seed, lighting a fire, opening a door, was part of a sacred balance. Early Roman religion was built on animism, the belief that spirits inhabited all things. These spirits, called noumena, had to be acknowledged. Offerings were made before meals, before journeys, before harvests. Religion was not about worship as we know it, but about respect, about keeping the natural and spiritual world in harmony. As Rome grew from a cluster of villages into a city, it began to absorb ideas from other cultures. To the north were the Etruscans, an older civilization known for their deep religious traditions. The Etruscans taught the Romans how to read signs from the gods, lightning patterns, animal organs, omens in nature. They introduced the idea of organized priesthoods and sacred law. Religion became a way to justify decisions. If the sky agreed, then the gods agreed. To the south were the Greeks, who had gods with names and stories, statues and myths. The Romans adopted many of these gods but gave them new names and new personalities. Zeus became Jupiter. Hera became Juno. Athena became Minerva. Apollo kept his name, but his role was reinterpreted. Roman gods were less emotional, less human. They were colder, more serious, and more focused on order. In Rome, the gods were not friends or tricksters, they were institutions. According to Roman legend, it was the second king of Rome, Numa Pompilius, who gave structure to religion. Unlike Romulus, the city's founder and a man of war, Numa was a man of peace. He created the first priesthoods, established the Vestal Virgins, built temples, and introduced the religious calendar. Festivals, sacrifices, and rituals were now tied to specific days. Every aspect of life was now connected to divine law. Religion became part of the state's foundation. For Romans, religion was not optional, it was a duty. If the gods were ignored, disaster could follow. Floods, plagues, famine. These were signs that something had gone wrong in the relationship between humans and the divine. Maintaining that relationship was the job of every citizen, but especially of Rome's leaders. A general would never go to war without first consulting the gods. A new building would not be started without a ritual to ask permission from the earth. The early gods of Rome were not yet famous. They had no myths. They were not romantic or vengeful. They were practical. Janus was the god of beginnings, doors, and transitions. Vesta was the goddess of the hearth and home. Quirinus represented the Roman people. These deities were woven into daily life. They did not tell stories, they kept the world stable. As Rome became more powerful, so did its gods. Temples were built across the city. The gods took on new roles. Religion became more visible, more political, and more public. But it never lost its foundation. Even at the height of empire, with marble statues and great festivals, religion was still about duty. It was about maintaining the balance between the world of people and the world of gods. The Roman gods did not fall from the sky. They were born from the ground, made by people, shaped by fear, law, and time. And in return, they shaped the world. They taught a civilization to see the sacred in the ordinary. And they remain with us, carved into stone, whispered in language, and echoing in the places they once ruled. Chapter 2. Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, the Capitoline Trinity. At the highest point in ancient Rome, on the Capitoline Hill, stood a temple dedicated to three of the most important gods in the Roman world: Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. This trio, known as the Capitoline Triad, represented the core values and power structure of the Roman state. Their temple was not only a religious centre, but also a symbol of Rome's identity, unity, and divine favour. Jupiter, the king of the gods, was the protector of the state, the wielder of thunder, and the guardian of law and order. He was Rome's version of the Greek god Zeus, but less concerned with personal drama and more focused on justice and stability. His authority was absolute. Roman generals and consuls would swear oaths in his name. Victories were dedicated to him, and when Rome faced disaster, it was Jupiter's favour they begged to restore. Juno, his consort, was more than just a goddess of marriage. She watched over the women of Rome, but she was also a fierce protector of the city. Her titles included Juno Regina, or Queen, and she was often invoked during times of war. She represented loyalty, strength, and Roman motherhood. In many ways, she was a divine symbol of Rome itself, dignified, resilient, and proud. Minerva, the third member of the triad, was the goddess of wisdom, strategy, and the crafts. Like Athena, her Greek counterpart, she represented intellect and skill, but also discipline and learning. She was worshipped by artisans, teachers, and military leaders alike. Minerva was not just a patron of thought, but of action informed by thought, planning, precision, and purpose. Together, these three gods formed a balanced vision of Roman ideals. Jupiter ruled from above with strength and justice. Juno embodied the civic spirit and social bonds. Minerva represented knowledge, planning, and the ability to carry ideas into action. The Capitoline Triad was more than a group of deities. It was a reflection of the Roman worldview. Their temple on the Capitoline Hill was built during the time of the early kings, and it remained a central place of worship for centuries. The structure itself was grand, with tall columns, a deep porch, and golden statues inside. From here, priests would conduct rituals that tied Rome's politics to its religion. Newly elected consuls made sacrifices here before taking office. Military triumphs ended with offerings made in this temple. It was a sacred place and a stage of power. This divine trio set the standard for how the Romans would organize other gods, by groups, by functions, and by values. They weren't worshipped just for blessings. They were part of the contract between Rome and the heavens. Honor them, and Rome would thrive. Neglect them, and chaos would follow. In understanding Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, we understand the foundation of Roman religion not as superstition, but as structure. These gods didn't just rule from the clouds. They ruled through laws, through rituals, and through the daily lives of the people who built the most enduring empire in the Western world. Chapter 3: The Hearth and the Household, Rome's Everyday Gods. Not every Roman god ruled from the sky. Many ruled from the kitchen, the doorway, or the family shrine. These were the gods of the hearth and the home, the deities closest to the everyday lives of Roman citizens. Unlike Jupiter, Juno, or Mars, these gods were not worshipped in grand temples. They lived inside the house. They were part of the family. At the centre of every Roman home was the hearth, and at the centre of the hearth was the goddess Vesta. She was the guardian of fire and family, and her flame symbolized the continuity of life. As long as the fire burned, the household was protected. Roman women, especially the mother of the household, tended the fire and kept Vesta's presence alive. In public life, the cult of Vesta was maintained by the Vestal Virgins, priestesses who guarded the sacred flame in Rome's temple of Vesta. This flame was never allowed to go out. If it did, it was considered a sign that Rome itself was in danger. The duties of the Vestal Virgins were strict. They were chosen as children, sworn to 30 years of celibacy and service. They had unique privileges and protections under Roman law, but also severe punishments if they broke their vows. Their presence at state rituals reinforced the connection between domestic virtue and national strength. In addition to Vesta, every home had its own protective spirits. The Lares were guardian spirits of the household and the land. They watched over the family and property, keeping away harm. The Penates were gods of the pantry, protectors of food, supply, and storage. Together, the Lares and Penates were honoured at small household shrines, often placed in the atrium. Daily offerings of food, wine, or incense were made to thank them and ask for protection. These rituals were typically simple, but sincere. They reinforced the idea that peace at home was just as important as power abroad. There was also Janus, the two-faced god of doorways and beginnings. Every doorway in Rome was under his watch. He looked both forward and backward, symbolizing transitions and the flow of time. He was invoked at the start of every ritual, every journey, and every new endeavor. His temple in Rome was unique. Its doors were kept open in times of war and closed only in times of peace, a rare event in Roman history. Household religion was deeply personal, but also deeply Roman. It was a miniature version of the state religion. The father of the household, or pater familias, acted as the priest. He led the family in prayers, sacrifices, and celebrations. Religious responsibility extended to every member of the home, with women and children playing key roles in maintaining rituals. Birthdays, marriages, and deaths were all marked by ceremonies honouring the household gods. Ancestors were also revered. The dead were believed to watch over the living, and their images, known as imagines, were kept and displayed during family events. On special days, Romans would visit tombs with offerings to ensure that their ancestors rested peacefully. Even in military camps, Roman soldiers would carry small statues of their household gods. No matter how far from home, they brought their faith with them. These gods gave a sense of comfort, continuity, and identity. In the chaos of battle or the boredom of distant postings, the presence of Lars and Penates provided a spiritual link to Rome. In every part of Roman life, from the simplest home to the grandest palace, these domestic deities were a constant presence. They reminded Romans that the divine was not only found in the clouds or in the capital, but also in the firelight, the doorway, and the dinner table. They were a daily reminder that faith began not in the temple, but at home. Chapter 4. Gods of War, Work, and the Wild, Rome's Practical Pantheon. Roman life was full of purpose, and for every task or challenge, there were gods to guide and protect. These gods were not distant, they were woven into the work and survival of daily life. Soldiers, merchants, farmers, and hunters all looked to specific deities for strength, wisdom, and success. Mars was the most iconic of these gods. Originally tied to agriculture and the protection of fields, Mars evolved into the powerful god of war. He became the ideal Roman warrior, strong, disciplined, and loyal to the state. He was also considered the father of Romulus, Rome's founder. March, the first month of Rome's military calendar, was named for him. His priests, the Salii, held festivals where they danced in armour to honour him. He stood for lawful violence and the protection of Rome. His influence extended beyond the battlefield. Statues of Mars were placed in military camps and city gates. In peacetime, he remained a guardian of Roman values, courage, duty, and sacrifice. Minerva, goddess of strategy and craft, supported those who used skill and intellect. Unlike Athena, her Greek counterpart, Minerva's focus was on organized labor and structured knowledge. Artisans, teachers, and doctors saw her as their patron. Her festival, Quinquatria, was a celebration of talent and discipline. She was respected for her quiet strength. Guilds of weavers, metalworkers, and painters often placed her image in their workshops. She was also honoured in schools and libraries, where learning was considered a sacred act. Mercury was the god of trade, travel, and communication. He protected merchants and travellers, and his influence extended from markets to distant roads. He was quick-witted and clever, sometimes even guiding thieves. Offerings were left at his shrines to ensure safety and profit. His winged sandals and staff became familiar symbols of commerce across the empire. As Rome's influence expanded, Mercury became a link between cultures and economies, his temples appearing in port cities and trade hubs from Gaul to Syria. Diana, goddess of the hunt and the moon, was worshipped especially in rural areas. She protected women, forests, and wild animals. Her temple at Lake Nemi was sacred, and her followers saw her as both fierce and pure. Her priest, the Rex Nemorensis, was chosen through a deadly ritual, reflecting the ancient and mysterious nature of her cult. Diana's dual role as protector of the wild and guardian of childbirth gave her a unique place in Roman faith. She represented independence and resilience, especially for women who sought strength beyond the domestic sphere. Ceres was the goddess of grain, agriculture, and fertility. Farmers prayed to her for good harvests. Her festival, the Cerealia, included games and sacrifices to honour the earth's bounty. She was part of the Aventine triad with Liber and Libera, gods who represented farming and freedom. Her temple also stored grain and legal records, tying her closely to the well-being of the Roman people. In times of famine, her priests played a key role in food distribution and public relief. Her imagery, ears of wheat, cornucopia, and motherly figures, remained a symbol of nourishment and justice. The Romans also worshipped ideas. Fortuna was the goddess of luck, Victoria of victory, and Virtus of courage. Each had temples and public celebrations. These abstract deities reminded Romans that fate, success, and virtue were real forces, worthy of devotion. Even hope, health, and loyalty had divine forms, spes, salus, and fides, each reinforcing a different Roman ideal. Shrines to these gods could be found in government buildings and military camps, showing how deeply values were tied to divine will. Temples ranged from grand buildings in the city to small shrines along roads and in homes. Worship was everywhere, in the fields, in the barracks, in the forum. Romans believed that every action had meaning, and every task was watched by the gods. Markets opened with prayers. Armies marched with blessings. Even craftsmen whispered oaths before beginning their work. In honouring these practical gods, the Romans gave divine meaning to ordinary life. Work was not just labour, it was a form of worship. And through that worship, Romans believed they earned favour, strength, and lasting order. The gods of war, work, and the wild ensured that every part of Roman civilization, its power, its economy, its identity, was supported by sacred tradition. Chapter 5. Adopting the Greek Pantheon. From Olympus to Rome. As Rome expanded across the Mediterranean, it encountered the deep mythology of the Greeks. The Romans, ever practical and adaptable, did not reject these foreign deities, they absorbed them. This process, known as syncretism, allowed Rome to unify its own religious identity with the beliefs of conquered peoples. In doing so, they transformed Greek gods into Roman ones, assigning them Latin names, slightly altered characteristics, and a new place within Rome's civic and religious order. The most recognizable deities of the Roman pantheon, Jupiter, Juno, Minerva, Venus, Mars, and Neptune, closely mirror their Greek counterparts: Zeus, Hera, Athena, Aphrodite, Ares, and Poseidon. However, While the Greeks saw their gods as human-like, flawed, and often ruled by emotion, Romans idealized their deities as symbols of discipline, power, and civic virtue. Roman religion was about control, hierarchy, and duty, not theatrical drama. Jupiter was not a trickster, but the dignified king of gods. Venus was not only a symbol of love, but the mother of Rome's founding hero, Aeneas. Their myths became state tools for reinforcing Roman identity. This cultural transformation was accelerated during the late Republic and early Empire. Writers like Ennius and Livy translated and adapted Greek myths into Roman literature. Virgil's Aeneid, commissioned under Augustus, became the definitive retelling. In it, Greek mythological themes were reimagined to justify Rome's divine destiny. Aeneas, the son of Venus, embodied the Roman ideal: pious, loyal, obedient to fate. His journey from the ruins of Troy to the banks of the Tiber was not just a story, it was state propaganda that tied Rome's founding to both myth and divine will. Greek artistic influence was also profound. Roman temples borrowed from the Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian styles. Gods were sculpted in the likeness of Greek originals, but statues of Jupiter, for example, were often more severe and less playful than Zeus. Public buildings, altars, and private homes were filled with imagery drawn from Greek stories, but always reshaped to support Roman values. Even minor Greek deities were adopted. Apollo, unusually kept under his Greek name, became a symbol of prophecy and healing. He was particularly favoured by Augustus, who claimed divine favour through Apollo's protection and commissioned the great temple of Apollo on the Palatine Hill. Bacchus, the Roman name for Dionysus, became associated with wine and celebration, but his mystery cult was also viewed with suspicion and was regulated by the Roman Senate during the Bacchanalia scandal in 186 BCE. The Roman calendar incorporated numerous festivals originally tied to Greek deities but given Latin names and meanings. The Lupercalia, Saturnalia, and Venalia were all steeped in syncretic rituals that blended imported myth with Roman tradition. These festivals reinforced the centrality of gods in everyday life, from the harvest to civic law. In adopting the Greek pantheon, Rome managed to create a religious structure that was both familiar and authoritative. These gods were no longer storytellers of chaos and beauty. They were guardians of empire, law, and identity. Their myths served not only to explain the world, but to justify Roman rule over it. By turning the gods of Olympus into instruments of the Roman state, Rome preserved the grandeur of Greek religion while refocusing it through the lens of order, virtue, and power. In doing so, the Roman gods became something unique, not just reflections of human nature, but the embodiment of a civilization's ambition. Chapter 6: Divine Emperors. When Men Became Gods. In the early Roman Republic, religion emphasized household rituals, civic piety, and the worship of traditional gods. Authority resided in the Senate, and divine favor was considered a blessing on the collective state. But as the Republic weakened and personal ambition grew, this balance shifted. With the rise of emperors, especially from Augustus onward, divinity moved from myth into the realm of men. The concept of apotheosis, a mortal becoming a god, became institutionalized. Emperors were no longer just rulers. In death, and sometimes in life, they became divine. Julius Caesar was the first Roman leader to be officially deified. After his assassination in 44 BCE, the Senate proclaimed him Divus Iulius, the divine Julius. This was more than symbolic. It came with a state cult, a temple in the Forum, and a newly established priesthood, the Flamen Divi Iuli. A comet seen during his funeral games was interpreted as his soul ascending to the heavens. His heir, Octavian, used this event to claim a divine connection, calling himself Divi Filius, son of the divine. This set the precedent. The Senate could raise emperors to godhood. Octavian, later Augustus, was careful during his lifetime. He accepted extraordinary honours, including the title Augustus, meaning the revered one, but avoided calling himself a god. After his death in 14 CE, the Senate deified him, and his cult spread widely. His birthday was celebrated across the empire. Statues showed him with idealized features, often barefoot, a sign of divinity in Roman art. The imperial cult became a formal institution. It didn't replace traditional Roman religion, but coexisted with it. Shrines and temples were built in honor of deified emperors, starting with Caesar and Augustus. The Ara Pacis, Altar of Peace, and the Temple of Divine Augustus blended politics and religion. Emperors were now part of Rome's sacred narrative, guardians of order and symbols of eternal Rome. The cult was strongest in the provinces, especially the Eastern Mediterranean, where ruler worship had long existed. Cities like Pergamon and Ephesus competed to honor emperors with games and temples. Provincial elites served as high priests of the imperial cult, gaining local prestige while signaling loyalty to Rome. Worship of the emperor became a civic duty. Some emperors embraced this devotion. Caligula, R. 37 to 41 CE, reportedly demanded worship as a living god, placing his statues in sacred sites, including the temple in Jerusalem. Nero Wojciech Re 54 to 68 CE also encouraged divine titles. Such actions, combined with instability, contributed to their unpopularity and eventual downfalls. The Senate could refuse or revoke divine honours. In extreme cases, they issued a damnatio memoriae, erasing the emperor's name and image from public memory. Other emperors were deified more favourably. Vespasian, who restored order after Nero, is said to have joked on his deathbed, "I think I'm becoming a god." His successors, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, were also deified. Their cults reinforced continuity and legitimacy, linking imperial succession to divine will. The imperial cult reached into daily life. Temples to emperors stood beside those to Jupiter and Mars. Coins bore inscriptions like Divus Augustus, showing scenes of apotheosis. Public ceremonies included sacrifices and games. Even household shrines, the Lararia, sometimes held statues of deified emperors, placed beside ancestral spirits. Worshipping the emperor became a gesture of civic loyalty and pride. Not everyone accepted this. Philosophers, especially Stoics, criticized the flattery surrounding imperial divinity. More critically, the rise of Christianity created direct conflict. Christians refused to take part in the cult, offering allegiance to their God alone. Refusal to offer incense or swear oaths was seen as treason. This led to waves of persecution, particularly under emperors like Decius and Diocletian. The cult declined as Christianity spread. Constantine, the first Christian emperor, was not deified in the traditional Roman way, though later Christian tradition honoured him. Theodosius I, in the late 4th century, banned support for pagan cults, including emperor worship. Temples were closed, rituals ended, and the imperial cult faded. Yet its legacy endured. The image of divine rulers influenced medieval kingship, Christian sainthood, and modern ideas of political power. The deification of emperors demonstrated how belief and authority could merge to legitimize rule. Rome's emperors had become gods, and through them, the empire claimed a kind of immortality. In inscriptions, ruins, and coins, the divine emperors remain. They were more than rulers. They became myths, symbols of Rome's ambition, and reminders of how power, once sanctified, could outlast a lifetime. Chapter 7. Mystery Cults. Secret Faiths of the Roman World. Beneath the structured rituals of state religion and the towering temples of Jupiter and Mars, another kind of worship thrived in ancient Rome, private, emotional, and often secretive. These were the mystery cults. They promised personal salvation, spiritual renewal, and a more intimate connection to the divine than traditional Roman religion offered. While the state gods demanded loyalty and sacrifice, the mystery religions offered transformation. The term mystery comes from the Greek mysteria, meaning initiation. Participation in these cults required special rites and oaths of secrecy. Initiates were sworn never to reveal what they had seen or experienced. This secrecy has left historians with more questions than answers, but archaeological remains, inscriptions, and hostile accounts from outsiders have helped us piece together their influence. One of the oldest and most widespread mystery cults was that of Demeter and Persephone, whose Eleusinian mysteries originated in Greece, but were practiced by many in Roman times. Initiates journeyed to Eleusis, or recreated its rituals elsewhere, enacting the myth of Persephone's descent into the underworld and return. It symbolized the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Those who completed the mysteries believed they were assured a more hopeful afterlife, radically different from Rome's usual view of a bleak, shadowy existence after death. Perhaps the most popular of all mystery cults in Rome was the cult of Isis, the Egyptian goddess of magic, motherhood, and the Nile. By the 1st century BCE, her temples stood in major Roman cities, including Pompeii and Rome itself. Her worship involved purification, sacred music, fasting, and complex rituals. Isis was portrayed as a loving, accessible goddess who listened to personal prayers. Her cult, unlike traditional Roman religion, welcomed women, the poor, and even slaves. Alongside Isis rose the cult of her consort Serapis, a god invented during the Hellenistic period to unify Greek and Egyptian religious elements. Serapis had both solar and underworld aspects, and his worship included dramatic pageantry and possibly secret initiations. Together, Isis and Serapis offered an emotional, multicultural, religious experience in the heart of a very Roman world. Another major force in Roman mystery religion was Mithras, a god of Persian origin whose cult appealed especially to soldiers. The Mithraic mysteries were held in underground temples called Mithraea, built to resemble caves. Worshippers, all male, underwent 7 stages of initiation. They reenacted the myth of Mithras slaying the cosmic bull, a moment of creation and sacrifice. Symbols of the sun, stars, and zodiac lined the walls, suggesting a cosmic dimension. Unlike the public altars of Jupiter, Mithras demanded commitment and discipline from his followers. The cult of Cybele and Attis brought ecstatic ritual to Roman religious life. Cybele, the Magna Mater or Great Mother, came from Anatolia and was officially brought to Rome during a crisis in the Second Punic War. Her worship involved drumming, frenzied dancing, and self-mortification. Her priests, the Galli, were eunuchs, often seen as outsiders. Despite this, the cult had official temples and a public festival, the Megalesia, yet its inner rituals were still cloaked in mystery. These cults filled a spiritual gap. Traditional Roman religion focused on maintaining order and winning favor through duty and public ritual. It rarely spoke to personal suffering or hope beyond death. But the mystery cults promised something more: rebirth, forgiveness, communion with a divine protector. They gave ordinary people a spiritual identity that transcended their civic roles. The state watched these cults closely. Some, like the Bacchanalia, the rites of Bacchus, Dionysus, were suppressed when they appeared to threaten moral order or political stability, In 1860 BCE, the Senate cracked down on the Bacchanalia in a sweeping decree, fearing secret gatherings and reports of criminal behaviour. Yet even this attempt couldn't stop the mystery traditions. They simply adapted and re-emerged under new names, protected by the very secrecy that made them so powerful. Mystery cults also laid the groundwork for how Romans understood personal religion. By the time Christianity emerged in the 1st century CE, it found fertile ground among those already seeking mystery, salvation, and eternal life. Early Christian rituals, baptism, Eucharist, shared meals, and initiation echoed the structure of the older mysteries. Roman officials often treated Christianity as just another mystery cult, until its radical monotheism and refusal to honour the emperor drew attention. By the 4th century, as Christianity gained dominance, mystery cults were pushed aside. They changed Roman spirituality from one of obligation to one of personal experience. Chapter 8. The Fall of the Old Gods. For centuries, the Roman gods stood unchallenged, worshipped in marble temples, honoured in law courts and family homes, and credited with the rise of the empire itself. But no pantheon, no matter how deeply rooted, is immune to change. By the 4th century CE, the world of Roman religion was in dramatic decline. The gods that had once watched over Rome's expansion were falling silent. The decline of traditional Roman religion did not happen overnight. It was a slow erosion, rooted in both internal transformation and external pressure. As the empire grew and diversified, the once clear boundaries of Roman belief blurred. Foreign cults, personal devotions, and mystery religions reshaped the spiritual landscape. Traditional Roman religion, with its formal state-centered rituals, began to feel impersonal and outdated to many. One major turning point came with the rise of Christianity. Initially dismissed as a small sect within Judaism, it began to spread across the empire during the 1st and 2nd centuries CE. Early Christians rejected all other gods, refused to participate in the imperial cult, and held secret gatherings, actions viewed with suspicion, and, at times, hostility. Periodic persecutions tried to suppress the faith, but Christianity continued to grow, especially among the poor, slaves, and urban populations. The 3rd century saw an increase in religious experimentation. Emperors like Elagabalus attempted to introduce new deities, such as the Syrian sun god Elagabal, to the Roman pantheon, which only deepened religious confusion. Meanwhile, emperors like Aurelian promoted the cult of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, in an attempt to unify the empire under a single solar deity. But these efforts, while temporarily popular, did not reverse the larger trend away from traditional polytheism. The decisive moment came in the early 4th century. In 312 CE, Constantine the Great reportedly saw a vision before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, a cross in the sky with the words, "In hoc signo vinces," "In this sign you will conquer." After his victory, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan in 313 CE, legalizing Christianity and restoring confiscated church property. Though he did not outlaw pagan worship, Constantine's favour toward Christianity marked a dramatic shift. He funded church construction, gave Christian bishops political power, and set in motion a transformation that would reshape the empire. Later, emperors followed suit. Theodosius I, ruling in the late 4th century, declared Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. Through a series of decrees, he closed pagan temples, banned sacrifices, and ended state support for traditional cults. Temples to Jupiter, Mars, and Venus were abandoned, looted, or converted into churches. Statues of gods were melted for coin or left to crumble. The Vestal Virgins were disbanded. The sacred fire of Vesta, which had burned for over 1,000 years, was extinguished forever in 394 CE. This was not a peaceful transition. Pagan philosophers protested the closure of academies. Temples were sometimes destroyed by Christian mobs. Books of classical learning were lost or hidden. Yet many elite Romans adapted quickly, blending old traditions with new Christian identity. The idea of Rome's divine mission was not abandoned, it was simply absorbed into a new faith. The empire remained holy, but now under the sign of the cross. Despite efforts to erase the old gods, their memory persisted. In rural areas and private homes, people quietly maintained ancestral rites for generations. Pagan philosophers like Hypatia in Alexandria continued teaching the old ways until violently silenced. Even Christian writers, such as Augustine and Jerome, debated the role of classical thought in the new religious order. The fall of the old gods was not just a religious transformation, it was cultural, political, and deeply symbolic. It marked the end of a world where gods shaped laws, blessed emperors, and watched over every field and hearth. In its place rose a new system that claimed universal truth and eternal salvation. Today, the gods of Rome remain in literature, art, and the stones of their temples. Their fall reminds us that belief systems, no matter how powerful, are never permanent. But the questions they inspired, about duty, fate, the divine, and the afterlife, are as enduring as the ruins they left behind. Chapter 9. The Legacy of the Gods. Though the temples are ruins and the altars cold, the Roman gods never truly vanished. Their names, stories, and symbols echo through Western civilization, embedded in our languages, calendars, institutions, and imaginations. As Christianity overtook paganism, the gods of Rome slipped into mythology. But rather than disappearing, they transformed. Their legacy is all around us. The planets in our solar system carry their names: Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury, Neptune, and even Pluto, once the god of the underworld. The days of the week reflect Greco-Roman deities through their Norse equivalents: Wednesday for Mercury, Woden; Thursday for Jupiter, Thor; Friday for Venus, Frigg. These names, adopted through linguistic and cultural blending, show how deeply the gods' identities were woven into everyday life. Roman mythology became a foundational element of Western art and literature. Renaissance artists like Michelangelo, Raphael, and Botticelli revived classical themes, painting Jupiter, Venus, and Apollo with Christian-era aesthetics. In literature, Roman myths influenced Shakespeare, Milton, and later Romantic poets. The gods, once objects of worship, became metaphors, symbols of beauty, power, passion, or fate. Their architectural legacy also lives on. Neoclassical buildings across Europe and the Americas, courthouses, museums, and universities echo the forms of Roman temples. Columns, domes, and pediments serve as visual references to the divine authority once vested in the gods. Even the language of governance, terms like Senate, Forum, Veto, and Imperium, originated in Rome's sacred and civic traditions. Educational systems for centuries used Roman religion and mythology to teach grammar, ethics, and history. Latin, preserved in Catholic liturgy and classical studies, carried the stories of the gods forward. Students learned of Jupiter's thunderbolts, Venus's beauty, and Mars's fury not as religion, but as cultural heritage. Mythology became a tool of education and identity. Modern psychology also found uses for ancient deities. Carl Jung and his followers interpreted gods as archetypes, timeless symbols rooted in the human psyche. Mars represents aggression, Venus, attraction, Mercury, communication. These figures, no longer divine, became reflections of inner human experience. In this way, Roman gods outlived their worship, evolving into models of personality and mythic storytelling. Even popular culture keeps them alive. From comic books to video games, novels to films, Roman gods appear as characters, plot devices, and dramatic symbols. Movies like Clash of the Titans, though based on Greek myths, borrow Roman names. TV shows reimagine Jupiter and Mars as intergalactic beings or political metaphors. Children read about Camp Jupiter in Rick Riordan's Heroes of Olympus series. These portrayals, though modernized, still preserve the essence of Roman mythology. Religious traditions, too, have echoed with ancient forms. The veneration of saints in Christianity, particularly in Catholic and Orthodox branches, bears structural resemblance to the older worship of divine figures with specific domains. Churches rose on temple sites, and holy days aligned with earlier pagan festivals. Christmas near Saturnalia, Easter near spring fertility rites. The transformation wasn't always a break. It was often a bridge. What remains most profound is the endurance of the questions the Roman gods embodied. What governs fate? What is justice? How do humans relate to the cosmos? These questions haven't faded with the marble of the Forum. They remain alive in philosophy, ethics, law, and storytelling. The gods of Rome no longer demand sacrifices or festivals, but their presence lingers in language, art, ritual, and imagination. They are not forgotten. They have become timeless figures, no longer commanding belief, but continuing to inspire it. In remembering them, we remember not just an ancient religion, but a civilization that shaped the very structure of the world we live in. The Roman gods fell, but they also endured. Chapter 10: Echoes of Eternity. As we close this journey through the divine world of ancient Rome, we are left with more than myths. We are left with a mirror. The Roman gods were never just figures of worship. They were reflections of how humans understood the universe: power, nature, love, and themselves. Though their temples are in ruins, their stories remain alive, not in ritual but in resonance. Roman religion offers a unique lens into the human condition. It was not static or blind. It evolved, absorbing the gods of the Greeks, embracing foreign deities through mystery cults, and eventually transforming under the rise of Christianity. It was deeply pragmatic. Religion in Rome was a function of state as much as spirit. To honor the gods was to uphold order, law, and civic duty. But within that framework, Romans still yearned for meaning, comfort, and the divine. These stories of Jupiter's thunderbolts, Venus's allure, or Pluto's underworld were not just entertainment. They were explanations. They filled the spaces where science had no reach and politics offered no peace. They reminded Romans of their place in the world, caught between fate and freedom, duty and desire. Even as these gods fell out of favour, the structure of belief they embodied endured. The transition to Christianity did not erase Rome's divine framework, it reinterpreted it. Saints replaced household gods. Cathedrals rose on former temples. New rituals inherited the formality and sacred rhythms of the old. Roman religion never truly ended. It evolved, transformed, and echoed through centuries of Western thought. Why do these stories still matter? Because they ask the same questions we ask today. What is justice? What is love? What happens when we die? The gods of Rome gave mythic form to the things we struggle to define. They helped build one of the most enduring civilizations in human history. And in their fall, they taught us that no power, divine or political, is eternal. This documentary has been carefully researched and grounded in academic and archaeological sources. Every chapter, every detail, and every myth has been fact-checked against the most reliable historical evidence available. While interpretations may evolve, the core truths of what the Romans believed, built, and left behind are clear and profoundly meaningful. If this journey through the gods of Rome has intrigued, enlightened, or inspired you, we ask you to support our work. Please consider subscribing to History's Edge on YouTube. Your subscription helps us continue to explore the past with depth, accuracy, and storytelling that honours the complexity of history. Thank you for joining us on this expedition into a world where gods once walked among mortals, where stories shaped empires, and where even in silence, the stones still speak. From the heart of ancient Rome to the edge of history, thank you for watching or listening.